Commander Jack Fletcher stood at the front of his classroom at the Galactic Navigation Academy watching his students file in for their first day. The humans moved with their usual casual swagger while the alien students entered with precisely calculated steps, their personal quantum computers humming softly. "Welcome to Advanced Navigation Theory," Jack announced, deliberately propping his worn leather boots on his desk. He could practically hear Dean Vrix 427's mandibles clicking with disapproval from 3 floors away. "I'm Commander Fletcher, but everyone calls me Detour." A Proximan student raised one of their sensory appendages. "Instructor, I cannot locate this designation Detour in the Academy database. Is this a formal title?" Jack grinned. "Got that nickname after finding my way home from the Carina Nebula with nothing but a broken compass and an old paper star chart. Took the scenic route but made it back in one piece." The alien students exchanged concerned glances, their neural interfaces probably calculating the statistical impossibility of such a feat. The human students, however, were leaning forward with interest. "But sir," a cerebellan student chittered, their crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the classroom's soft light, "our quantum navigation arrays can plot a course through the Carina Nebula with 99.99% accuracy in under 7 standard days." 7 days? Jack laughed, pulling out an ancient brass sextant from his desk drawer. "Kid, I can do it in 20 minutes with this beauty and a decent view of the stars." The room erupted in a chaos of clicking, buzzing, and shocked gasps. One Matherian student actually leaked a small cloud of confused pheromones. "Impossible," the cerebellan protested, their quantum computer whirring as it tried to process this claim. "The computational requirements alone would." Jack held up a hand. "That's exactly the problem with modern navigation. You're all so busy letting your computers do the thinking, you've forgotten how to actually see where you're going." A soft chime interrupted his lecture, followed by the materialization of a holographic message. Dean Vrix 427's angular face appeared, mandibles twitching with barely concealed irritation. "Commander Fletcher," the dean's voice dripped with forced politeness, "might I remind you that the Academy's curriculum requires adherence to standardized navigation protocols. We cannot have students engaging in primitive methodologies." Jack twirled the sextant between his fingers. "With all due respect, Dean, my primitive methods have saved more ships than your quantum arrays have. But don't worry, we'll stick to the curriculum." He winked at his students as the dean's hologram flickered out. Most of the time. The human students were grinning now, while their alien classmates appeared torn between fascination and horror. A young Arcturian raised their gravity manipulation appendage. "Commander," they asked, their voice modulating through several frequencies, "are you suggesting that humans can navigate interstellar space without quantum computational assistance?" "Navigate it." Jack stood up, walking to the holographic star map that dominated the classroom's front wall. With a gesture he expanded it to show the entire Orion arm. "We've been finding our way across oceans and deserts since before we had electricity. Space is just a bigger ocean with better landmarks." He could see the moment his words hit home. The alien students' various sensory organs widened, narrowed, or vibrated as they contemplated this perspective. Even the cerebellan's quantum computer seemed to pause its constant calculations. "Now," Jack said, tossing the sextant to a startled Matherian student who caught it in a field of psychic energy, "who wants to learn how to navigate like a human?" The dean's mandibles were definitely going to be clicking overtime about this one. The Academy's grand amphitheater buzzed with excitement as Dean Vrix 427 took the stage, his crystalline form catching the light in a way that was probably supposed to be impressive but mostly just looked like a disco ball having an identity crisis. "Esteemed faculty and students," the dean's mandibles clicked rhythmically. "It is my honor to announce the 427th Annual Galactic Navigation Championship." He paused for effect, probably counting the exact milliseconds for optimal dramatic impact. "This year's challenge will test the very limits of computational navigation." Jack, lounging in the back row with his feet propped up on an empty seat, muttered under his breath, "Because that worked so well for the last 426 competitions." The dean continued, his antenna twitching slightly. "Teams will navigate through the treacherous Maelstrom Nebula, calculating routes through quantum fluctuations, gravimetric distortions, and temporal anomalies. The winning team will plot the most efficient course while maintaining the highest safety parameters." A holographic display materialized above the stage, showing the swirling chaos of the Maelstrom Nebula. Several alien students activated their neural interfaces, already beginning preliminary calculations. Each team will have access to our latest quantum navigation arrays, the dean announced proudly. The competition will last one standard week, allowing proper time for all necessary computations. Jack couldn't help himself. He stood up, his voice carrying across the amphitheater. A week, to plot one course? In my senior year we had to navigate the Carina spiral in under an hour, blindfolded, while singing 99 bottles of beer. The amphitheater fell silent. Dean Vrick's 427's mandibles froze mid-click. Commander Fletcher, the dean's voice crackled with forced politeness, while we appreciate your colorful contributions to the Academy. This competition requires precise quantum calculations. We cannot rely on human intuition. Care to put that to the test? Jack grinned. Let my human students compete. Same challenge, but we'll use traditional navigation methods. The alien students erupted in a cacophony of clicks, buzzes, and telepathic exclamations. The dean's crystalline form shifted through several shades of indignation. You cannot be serious, he sputtered. Navigate the Maelstrom without quantum computers. It's suicide. Tell that to Captain Maria Rodriguez, Jack countered. She guided a convoy of refugee ships through the Maelstrom during the Proximan War, using nothing but stellar cartography and dead reckoning. While being shot at, a young Arcturian student, Zena, spoke up from the middle rows. I've studied that incident. The quantum arrays were all disabled by electromagnetic pulse weapons, but the historical records never explained how the human ships navigated. Because sometimes, Jack said, pulling out his old sextant, the simplest solution is the best one. So what do you say, Dean? Ready to see how humans navigate? Dean Vrick's 427's crystalline form vibrated with barely contained frustration. Very well, he finally clicked. Your human students may compete. When they fail, perhaps we can finally put these primitive methods to rest. And when we succeed, Jack added, you'll add celestial navigation to the standard curriculum. The dean's mandibles clicked rapidly, the cerebellum equivalent of a derisive laugh. Agreed. Though I should warn you, Commander, this year's competition has been specifically designed to showcase our new Mark V quantum navigation array. It's the most advanced computational system ever created. Fantastic, Jack beamed. We'll bring some paper star charts and a calculator. Maybe a protractor if we're feeling fancy. As the alien students filed out, already forming their teams and initializing their quantum computers, Jack's human students gathered around him. Commander, one of them asked, you do know the Maelstrom Nebula scrambles most visual navigation references, right? Jack's grin widened. Of course, but what the dean doesn't know is that humans have been using the Maelstrom's own chaos as a navigation aid for years. Those quantum fluctuations, they create patterns, you just have to know how to read them. Like reading the weather back on Earth, another student realized. Exactly. Now Jack pulled out a stack of old-fashioned star charts. Who's ready to make some aliens question everything they think they know about navigation? The dean's voice echoed from the stage. The competition begins in 3 days. May the most advanced computational methods prevail. Jack whispered to his students, may the best sailors win. The next 3 days at the Galactic Navigation Academy resembled a tale of two very different schools. In the quantum computing labs, alien students sat in perfect meditation pods, their neural interfaces glowing as they ran simulation after simulation of the Maelstrom Nebula's conditions. Meanwhile, in Commander Fletcher's classroom, things were a bit more nautical. No, hold the sextant higher, Jack instructed, watching his students practice in the Academy's holographic training room. Pretend you're on the deck of a ship in stormy seas. The stars don't care if you're comfortable. Commander Lisa Chen called out. Her sextant pointed at a holographic representation of the Maelstrom. I think I see what you mean about the patterns. The quantum fluctuations are creating ripples like waves on an ocean. Now you're getting it. Jack beamed. The Maelstrom isn't just chaos, it's a dance. Those temporal eddies, they're like ocean currents. The gravimetric distortions, think of them as your winds and tides. A soft cough interrupted their session. Dean Vrix 427 stood in the doorway, his crystalline form radiating disapproval. Commander Fletcher, the dean clicked. I couldn't help but notice your students haven't logged any time in the quantum computation labs. Don't need 'em, Jack replied cheerfully. We're going old school. The dean's mandibles twitched. Perhaps you misunderstand the magnitude of this challenge. The Maelstrom's conditions change every 2.7 seconds. Even our most advanced computers require multiple days to calculate safe passages. Yeah, that's the problem with computers, Jack said, helping another student adjust their stance. They try to calculate every possible outcome. Humans, we read the signs and adapt, like good sailors. Sailors, the dean's crystalline form shifted to a shade of confused purple. Commander, space is not an ocean. Sure it is, Jack grinned. Just a really big one with better views. After the dean stormed out, glided out in a geometrically precise huff, Jack gathered his students around a holographic display of the Maelstrom. All right, here's what the quantum jockeys don't understand, he said, manipulating the display to show the nebula's movement patterns. They're so busy trying to predict every quantum fluctuation that they miss the bigger picture. The Maelstrom has rhythms, just like any natural phenomenon. Like weather patterns, asked Miguel, a former meteorologist from Mars colony. Exactly. The aliens think we're crazy for using primitive methods, but they've forgotten something crucial. Humans have been reading natural patterns since we first looked up at the stars. We don't need to calculate every possibility. We just need to understand the flow. Over in the quantum labs, the alien teams were running their 700 simulation. The cerebellum team had already crashed their virtual ships 43 times, each failure adding another day to their projected calculation time. Back in Jack's classroom, his students were gathered around an actual wooden table which had caused quite a stir when he'd had it installed, spreading out physical star charts and plotting courses with pencils and protractors. Sir, one of the students asked, won't the dean try to stop us from using these methods during the actual competition? Jack laughed. He already tried. Filed a formal complaint about non-standard navigation tools. But here's the beautiful part. There's nothing in the rulebook that says we have to use quantum computers. They never thought they needed that rule because no one ever considered using anything else. Commander, Lisa called out excitedly. I think I've found something. Look at how the temporal eddies form these spiral patterns. They're almost like the trade winds back on Earth. Jack walked over and studied her charts, his grin widening. Now that's thinking like a navigator. The aliens are so focused on fighting the Maelstrom's chaos, they never considered working with it. As the day wound down, Jack watched his students practicing their calculations, making adjustments, learning to read the subtle patterns in the nebula's chaos. Through the window he could see the alien team still locked in their meditation pods, their quantum computers humming away. You know what the real difference is, he mused aloud. They're trying to solve the Maelstrom like it's a math problem. We're treating it like an adventure. A message chimed on the classroom's holographic display. Competition begins tomorrow at 0800 hours. All teams report to Simulation Chamber 7. All right folks, Jack announced, one last thing before we call it a day. What's the first rule of navigation? His students responded in unison, grins on their faces. Trust your instruments but trust your gut more. And the second rule, when in doubt ask yourself, what would ancient Polynesian wayfinders do? Jack smiled proudly. The dean thinks we're bringing calculators to a quantum computer fight. Wait until he sees what happens when we bring 3,000 years of human navigation history instead. Simulation Chamber 7 resembled a cross between a spaceship bridge and a quantum computing center, with one notable addition: Commander Fletcher's wooden table, which had been grudgingly admitted after a heated debate about traditional navigation implements. Dean Vrix 427 stood at the center of the chamber, his crystalline form perfectly aligned with the room's geometric patterns. Welcome to the 427th Annual Galactic Navigation Championship. Each team will be presented with the same challenge, plotting a safe course through the Maelstrom Nebula's most turbulent section. The alien team sat in their meditation pods, neural interfaces glowing. Jack's human students gathered around their wooden table, spreading out star charts and checking their sextants. The simulation begins, now. The chamber's holographic system sprang to life, surrounding each team with a perfect recreation of the Maelstrom Nebula. Swirling quantum storms and temporal eddies filled the space around them, their chaotic patterns dancing in the artificial starlight. The cerebellum team immediately activated their Mark VII quantum navigation array, its crystalline processors humming with complex calculations. Initial computational matrix established, their leader announced. Estimated time to first root calculation 37 hours. The Mytharian team's psychic interfaces pulsed as they began their calculations. Quantum probability fields mapped. Beginning temporal variance analysis. Meanwhile at the wooden table, Lisa, what do you see in the northeastern quadrant? Jack asked, watching his students work. Lisa adjusted her sextant, studying the swirling patterns. Those temporal eddies are forming a spiral pattern, just like we practiced. If we time it right. She quickly sketched a curve on their chart. Miguel nodded excitedly. It's just like a high-pressure system back home. The quantum fluctuations are following the same fluid dynamics patterns. The dean hovered nearby, mandibles twitching as he watched the humans make marks on paper. Commander Fletcher, surely you don't expect to plot a safe course through the maelstrom with pencils. Of course not, Jack replied cheerfully. We've also got protractors. Hours passed. The alien teams remained in deep computational meditation, their quantum arrays processing countless variables. The humans, on the other hand, were getting surprisingly physical with their navigation. Feel that simulated gravitational pull. Jack demonstrated, leaning into the holographic current. The maelstrom's got a rhythm to it. You don't fight a current this strong, you use it. Like tacking into the wind, one of his students exclaimed. Exactly. Now who's got the temporal eddy calculations? Lisa held up her chart. If we time our approach with this major fluctuation cycle, we can ride the quantum wake all the way through the first sector. The dean's crystalline form vibrated with concern. Commander, your team hasn't even initiated their first quantum probability calculation. Don't need to, Jack said, pointing to a particularly chaotic section of the maelstrom. See that pattern there? Reminds me of the roaring 40s back on Earth. Nasty winds, but if you know how to read them. This is preposterous. The dean's mandibles clicked rapidly. You cannot navigate quantum phenomena by comparing them to Earth weather patterns. Watch us, Jack winked. As the first day of competition drew to a close, the alien teams had generated thousands of potential routes, each requiring further analysis. The human team had drawn exactly one line through the maelstrom, bold, curved, and annotated with notes like "watch for quantum squalls here," and "nice temporal surfing conditions." Time for preliminary results, the dean announced. Each team will submit their first proposed route for simulation testing. The cerebellum team's quantum array hummed. We have calculated a route with only a 67% chance of catastrophic failure. Request additional computation time. The Mytharian team's psychic interfaces pulsed desperately. Our probability matrices are still inconclusive. The quantum variables are uncooperative. The human team. The dean's voice dripped with barely concealed sarcasm. Jack stepped forward, holding up their completed chart. We're ready to go. Who wants to see how to ride a quantum storm? The simulation chamber's main display activated, showing the humans' proposed route. A collective gasp arose from the alien teams as they saw the course. It didn't avoid the maelstrom's chaos. It wove through it, using the very patterns they had been trying to calculate around. This is impossible, the dean sputtered. You cannot simply draw a line through a quantum storm. Jack smiled. Let's find out. Fire up the simulator. Every being in the chamber held their breath, or equivalent respiratory function, as the simulation began. The human team's route was about to be tested, and not a single quantum computer had been involved in its creation. The dean's mandibles clicked nervously. May the most advanced computational methods prevail. May the best sailors win, Jack whispered, watching the simulation unfold. The simulation chamber erupted in chaos as every quantum computer simultaneously threw up error messages. The Mark VII navigation arrays, the pride of the Academy's computational fleet, started displaying readings that looked suspiciously like the ancient blue screen of death. This is impossible. Dean Vrix 427's crystalline form flickered through a rainbow of distressed colors. The quantum matrices are destabilizing across all systems. Jack watched as the alien teams frantically tried to restore their neural interfaces. What exactly are we looking at, Dean? The dean's mandibles clicked in rapid succession. The maelstrom, it's not following any of our projected patterns. The quantum fluctuations are becoming exponentially more chaotic. None of our calculations are valid anymore. Ah, Jack nodded sagely. Mother Nature throwing a curveball. Happens all the time. This is not a time for your human metaphors. The dean's voice crackled with static. We have 17 teams in simulated space, and all our navigation systems are failing. The chamber's main display showed the various alien ships frozen in space, their quantum computers unable to plot new courses through the suddenly unpredictable maelstrom. The human team's vessel, however, was still moving. "Lisa," Jack called out, "what do you see?" Lisa was already adjusting her sextant, studying the new patterns forming in the holographic storm. The temporal eddies are shifting faster, but they're following a new rhythm. It's like when a hurricane suddenly changes direction. "Miguel, the quantum fluctuations are consolidating," Miguel reported, sketching rapidly on their charts, "creating something similar to a supercell storm system. If we treat it like a meteorological event." The dean interrupted, his voice pitched higher than usual. "You cannot treat a quantum anomaly like a weather pattern. This is highly advanced physics." "Really?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks an awful lot like a perfect storm." "And what do sailors do in a storm?" His students grinned. "We sail it." Commander Fletcher, the dean's crystalline form, was practically vibrating. "The other teams are stranded without computational guidance. We need to end the simulation before we prove that sometimes the old ways are the best ways." Jack finished. He turned to his team. "All right, folks, this is what we've trained for. Miguel, give me a read on those quantum currents, forming a spiral pattern, increasing in intensity toward the center. If we time it right, we could use the gravitational eddies to slingshot around the worst of it." Lisa jumped in. "The temporal distortions are creating a pattern, similar to trade winds. We can use them to maintain our heading." The alien teams watched in bewilderment, as the humans gathered around their wooden table, making quick calculations with pencils and protractors, calling out observations about quantum weather patterns, as if they were discussing a particularly interesting sailing day. "Dean," Jack said, looking up from their revised charts, "we can guide the other ships through." "Using pencils and paper?" The dean's mandibles drooped in disbelief. "Using 3,000 years of human navigation experience," Jack corrected. "Every storm has a pattern, even quantum ones. You just have to know how to read it." The chamber fell silent as the alien teams looked at each other, their advanced computational systems still flashing error messages. Finally, the cerebellum team leader spoke up. "Our quantum arrays have failed us," they admitted. "We request human navigational assistance." One by one, the other teams joined in, their various appendages, tentacles, and neural interfaces signaling agreement. The dean's crystalline form shifted through several shades of resignation before he finally nodded. "Very well, Commander Fletcher. Show us how humans navigate." Jack grinned and turned to his students. "All right, sailors. Let's show them how it's done. Lisa, start broadcasting our charts to all ships. Miguel, talk them through the quantum weather patterns. Remember, everyone, what's the first rule of navigation?" The humans called out in unison. "Trust your instruments, but trust your gut more." As the human team began guiding their alien colleagues through the chaotic maelstrom, using nothing more sophisticated than carefully drawn charts and centuries-old navigation techniques, Dean Vrix 427 watched in amazement. "Remarkable," he clicked softly. "They're not fighting the chaos, they're dancing with it." Jack finished watching his students work. Sometimes the most advanced solution is remembering what we learned from our ancestors. The maelstrom swirled around them, its quantum storms raging, but for the first time in the competition's history, the ships moved through it not with mathematical precision, but with the fluid grace of sailing vessels riding the winds of ancient Earth. 3 days after what would become known as the Great Quantum Calculator Crash, the Galactic Navigation Academy's main hall was packed for what promised to be a very interesting graduation ceremony. Dean Vrix 427's crystalline form had settled into a sort of resigned blue-green as he addressed the assembled crowd. "In light of recent events," the dean's mandibles clicked methodically, "the Academy Board has been forced to re-evaluate certain aspects of our curriculum." Jack sat in the front row, boots propped up on the chair in front of him, grinning like a cat that had not only eaten the canary, but had also taught it to sing sea shanties first. "The 427th Annual Navigation Championship has been officially declared incomplete," the dean continued, his crystalline form flickering slightly. "However, given the unprecedented circumstances, special commendations are being awarded to the human team for their extraordinary demonstration of alternative navigation techniques. Alternative, Jack called out cheerfully. Don't you mean historically proven and reliable? The dean's mandibles clicked in what might have been a sigh. Yes, well, the board has also approved the immediate implementation of a new required course, traditional navigation methods and pattern recognition. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several quantum computers actually powered down in protest. Furthermore, the dean added, his voice carrying a hint of what might have been admiration, Commander Fletcher has been appointed to head the new Department of Hybrid Navigation Studies, combining both quantum computational methods and traditional human techniques. Jack stood up, taking his place at the podium. Thank you, Dean, and may I say, that shade of resigned acceptance looks lovely on you. The dean's crystalline form flickered briefly to an irritated purple before he composed himself. Now, Jack addressed the assembled students. I know some of you are wondering why we're adding what seems like a step backward to our curriculum, but here's the thing about navigation. It's not about having the most advanced technology. It's about understanding the fundamental patterns of space, time, and motion. Sometimes that means using quantum computers, sometimes it means using a sextant and a good eye for weather patterns, and sometimes, he pulled out his trusty brass sextant, holding it up to the light. Sometimes it means remembering that every technological advancement we've made started with humans looking up at the stars and saying, I bet we can find our way using those. In the back of the hall, Lisa and Miguel were already surrounded by alien students, eagerly showing them how to use sextants and read star charts. A young cerebellan was attempting to sketch a constellation pattern, their crystalline appendages awkwardly gripping a pencil. The Maelstrom taught us something important, Jack continued. The universe doesn't care about our fancy calculations, it doesn't follow our rules, but it does follow patterns, and those patterns are there for anyone willing to learn how to see them. The dean stepped forward again, his mandibles clicking in what was definitely becoming a more respectful rhythm. Commander Fletcher has also been asked to compile a textbook on human navigation techniques, although, he added with a slight twitch, perhaps with fewer references to riding the quantum waves and surfing the temporal tides. Don't forget cosmic windsurfing, Jack added helpfully. That's Chapter 3. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Jack found himself standing with the dean in the observation dome, watching the stars wheel overhead. You know, the dean clicked thoughtfully, I still don't entirely understand how your students knew which patterns to follow in the Maelstrom. Jack smiled, pointing to the stars. Humans have been reading patterns in the sky since we first looked up. We've navigated across vast oceans, through raging storms, across endless deserts. Space? He shrugged. Space is just another ocean, a really big, really weird ocean with quantum physics instead of waves. But the principles, they're the same as they've always been. And what principles are those? The dean asked, his crystalline form reflecting the starlight. Watch, learn, adapt, and most importantly, Jack pulled out his sextant one more time. Never be afraid to do things the old-fashioned way. The dean's mandibles clicked in what might have been a chuckle. Perhaps you could teach me how to use one of those devices. Dean, Jack grinned. I thought you'd never ask. First lesson, you're holding it upside down. As they stood there, human and alien together, learning to read the ancient patterns of the stars, a quantum computer somewhere in the academy spontaneously generated an error message that looked suspiciously like a facepalm emoji. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all.